What's wrong with you people?
If you're looking for a Christ-centered, scripture-driven, and student-focused education, then may we suggest Texas Baptist College? At TBC, they are committed to providing trustworthy Christian higher education for more faithful service to Christ. Whether you're headed to ministry, the marketplace, or anywhere in between, TBC will help you find your calling. Learn more at texasbaptistcollege.com/admissions.
Welcome to Not Another Baptist Podcast. My name is Kyle Bierman. I'm a rural specialist with the North American Mission Board. Matt is out today, but I am very excited to be joined by Dr. Jason Allen, the president of Midwestern Baptist Theological Seminary in beautiful Kansas City, Missouri. And so Dr. Allen, welcome back to the show. This is your second time, I believe, on the show. The first time was about 3 years ago or so. I'm sure that made all the difference in your life. But I know I'm very excited to have you back on the show and to be talking about a new book that we'll dive into here in just a minute. But just as way of refresher, remind our listeners who you are and what you do there at Midwestern.
Thank you, Kyle. First of all, before I get to that, you need to clarify, do you spell your name with two E's or an E and a U?
One U, two E's, two N's.
Okay, I was concerned your name was spelled as though you were Beer Man, BEERMAN, which may jeopardize this whole recording.
No, that is how it's pronounced, but that is not how it's spelled. So
okay, listen, it's so good to be with you today. I appreciate you and Matt and what you guys are doing with the podcast. I occasionally get to listen to it, and appreciate the winsome way you go about recording it, and your winsome public personalities, and your ministry disposition is sweet and encouraging. So thank you. I serve here at Midwestern Seminary in Kansas City, Missouri, also president of our undergraduate program, Spurgeon College. And I just started my 11th year. So in October, about 3 weeks ago, we celebrated my 10th anniversary, and it was such a sweet several days. It was kind of emotional several days as well, because people are showing me, like by the hour, pictures of my kids 10 years ago and pictures of the institution 10 years ago. And so processing all of that was kind of emotional in some ways, but in some sweet ways. So that's what we're doing here. I'm happy to take the conversation wherever you want to go as it relates to the story of Midwestern Seminary. But I'm just really grateful to get to serve God's people here in Kansas City at Midwestern Seminary and Spurgeon College.
Yeah. Well, so you shared this story of your 10 years at Midwestern in a book that you recently released called Turnaround. I'm sure there were a lot of emotions that went into this book. Matt and I have dealt primarily in our lives and ministries with church revitalization and seeing struggling churches by the grace of God come back to life. But we know those churches are probably the thing we think the most about when it comes to revitalization, but they're certainly not the only institutions that need to be revitalized. And I know you came to a seminary that was in desperate need of revitalization. And so talk to us about, 10 years in, what made you write this book? What really inspired you to share this story in a long form like you did?
Yeah, I would say several reasons. First of all, as you've alluded to, the name of the book is Turnaround, the remarkable story of an institutional transformation and the 10 essential principles and practices that made it happen. And it came out, oddly enough, almost exactly in concert with my 10th anniversary here. That was not the original plan. In fact, the first thought of writing a book about the story here was actually from Tom Rayner, who was then the president of Lifeway. As I would look in hindsight, he was in the final season of his ministry there. But he raised the topic with me. And I was a little reluctant at first. In fact, at first I was quite reluctant, because such a book could always be misinterpreted. And no doubt this book has probably been misinterpreted by some. But then once I got my mind around, okay, there's a story to tell, and as president, I'm the person to tell the story. Now, if you read the book from start to finish, I give credit to God and human credit to a team. And so this is not about how great a leader I am. It's not about what I've done for 10 years. It's emphatically not those things. But as president, you really are the one that's most appropriately suited to tell this story. And I wanted to tell the story because, first of all, there's a lot of bad news out there. A lot of bad news out there for Christians. We hear of churches declining. We hear of Christian ministries declining. We hear of Christian institutions declining. And I thought, this has been a really, really sweet story the past decade, 7, 8 years then when we were getting into the book. And by the way, it providentially came out in concert with my 10th. As I mentioned, those sketches would come out, like a year or so earlier, but with COVID and supply chain issues and all that, it just kind of got delayed. So you wake up one day and say, this is sweet providence. It'll come out in concert with the 10th. But I wanted to be able to tell the story because Christians need to hear good news. They need to know that God is doing some special things right now around the world. Right now, some special things in the Southern Baptist Convention. Additionally, I wanted to tell the story because I felt like we had a counter narrative to tell. And by that, I mean the leadership industrial complex, as I refer to it in my book, is always out there. It's ever present. Its voice is loud. It's telling us you have to listen to these podcasts. You have to buy all these books. You have to adopt all these theories. You have to go to all these workshops. And we live in this world where we are awash in leadership material, leadership theories, leadership instructional opportunities. And for me, I argue in the book that leadership is actually pretty simple, not easy, but simple. It's straightforward. And so I wanted to push back a little bit against just the current leadership industrial complex that finds all of this is so complicated, so big, so fast paced, so ever evolving that the beleaguered leader is like on this never ending quest to find that one nugget of insight that will lead them to a breakthrough in their family, their business, their church, their ministry, their entity, whatever. And so I try to do that in the book, to push back, to tell the story of Midwestern so the readers be encouraged, and then to unpack how it happened so they'll also be encouraged to say, you know what, Midwestern has experienced a sweet season, so can we.
That's fantastic. Now, you talked a little bit about this and how this is different than other leadership books, because as we know, I mean, you walk into a Barnes and Noble or even a Mardell's, if you're blessed to have Mardell's, there's a huge section on leadership, and new leadership books are being written all the time with, as you mentioned, kind of the silver bullet, right? This is the one leadership book that's going to change everything in your life. And, as leaders become more seasoned, I think hopefully we figure out that that's not necessarily the case, right? There's not a book out there that and one practice that's going to change everything. So what would you say distinguishes this book from the other leadership books that are available?
I would say a few things. First of all, I'm getting at it at the foundational level from a spiritual and biblical standpoint. Now, there's a lot of common grace insights here. So this is not, from start to finish, a theological work or even necessarily a spiritual work, start to finish on every page. But I do come at it foundationally from that level. Second of all, I come at it understanding that all of leadership is stewardship. And I do mean that in a biblical spiritual sense. And so whatever the role is, your listeners, if they're a father or mother, a school teacher, a youth minister, a missionary, a church planter, et cetera, we need to undertake whatever responsibility God has given us, whatever role he has placed us in, with a peaked sense of stewardship, a heightened sense of stewardship. So it's different because it's theological and spiritual at its foundational level. It's different because we get at this from an eternal sense of stewardship. And it's different, again, because I'm turning on its head a lot of the conventional wisdom that says leadership is that complicated. Okay, and here's the little analogy I use in the book as I'm setting up. I talk about our historical moment, Kyle. And if you think about it again, we find ourselves awash in the curriculum, awash in the materials, awash in all the support structures for leadership. But we also find ourselves looking for leaders. And we look to Washington, we don't see many. We look to religious organizations, we don't see many. We look to corporate leaders, we don't see many. And it is this great contrast. And then you go back to the great leaders in history that folks like you and I and your listeners, look up to, whether it's in the spiritual realm, in the history of the church, individuals like Martin Luther or Charles Spurgeon, whether it's in the geopolitical realm, individuals like Ronald Reagan or Winston Churchill. Those individuals, especially when you get earlier in the 20th century and then in the 19th, 18th, 17th, et cetera, centuries back, leadership material wasn't a thing. Leadership insights wasn't a thing. You weren't getting advanced degrees in leadership, right? And so there is this great irony that with a dearth of leadership materials and resources, we seem to have a sufficient number of leaders. Now we have an abundance of leadership resources and materials, and there seems to be a dearth of true leaders.
So let's talk a little bit about your own leadership journey over the last, especially over the last 10 years. How did you discover the principles that you talk about in the book? And how did you kind of distill those down to, these are really the big things that were pivotal, that transformed or are transforming Midwestern?
Yeah, I would answer that in two ways. First of all, some of these would fall into a category of kind of basic leadership principles or practice I showed up in Kansas City with 10 years mindful of. Okay. Now, I've grown in my understanding of those. I've grown in my sense of their importance, but I showed up in Kansas City like knowing kind of intuitively, you need to be convictional. You need to know who you are, what you believe. Knowing that mission matters, like why you exist. Knowing that organization needs to have a sense of vision where it's going. And so those really are the big three: what you believe, your convictions; why you exist, your mission; where you're going, your vision. Okay. And again, depending upon which leadership book you read, those may be defined a little bit differently. But in my mind, those are kind of the big three categories of organizational leadership: what you believe, why you exist, where you're going. And so those were things kind of I showed up very mindful of. I showed up understanding that leaders need to work hard to communicate with sufficient clarity and frequency. But there were other things here that maybe I was sort of mindful of, but it wasn't on the forefront of my mind. For instance, I moved to Kansas City like mindful that you needed to steward your resources wisely, your money as an organization. But it was in those early months and years here when we were just frankly dead broke financially that I learned that in a greater sense of urgency. There were things like your team, like your on the personnel side of things. So, okay, you need to be intentional when you hire. You need to be careful about how you hire. You need to be intentional how you lead those people. But over the years, I've grown to understand it's more deeper than that. You don't need to just lead your team well. You need to cherish your team. Other aspects, matters like culture. When people come to our campus at Midwestern Seminary, I hear time and time again how unique our culture is. People are convictional. They're cheerful. People seem to enjoy serving here. People seem to enjoy studying here. And the culture piece has grown with so much importance with every year to me. And the difficulty is you can't really like coordinate it. You can't choreograph it. You can't fabricate it. You can do some things to hopefully foster the right culture, to engender a healthy culture, but ultimately it's more than a recipe. And so some of those things, again, I've become increasingly aware of. Accountability, increasingly aware of. I knew when I came here that an organization needed to have clear lines of accountability, but being here year after year understands everybody needs accountability. I need accountability. And not just in the formal sense of do you spend money on this or that, or are you alone with a woman, yes or no, but in other less obvious ways. Who is responsible for what? And how do we measure faithfulness in that area or unfaithfulness in that area? How do we measure success in that area or lack of success in that area? So I would say some of the principles that I came in really, really clear about. Some of those I came in somewhat clear about. Some of those I came in not thinking that much about, but you learn over the years, I really do need to be thinking more about that. Then you look up after 8 or 9 years here and realize, boy, 10 years ago, I was not thinking that, but now that we're deep into this project, that has become very essential for our work here.
So we know the work of ministry has always been difficult. It's never been a walk in the park. But the last 2 years or so have been especially difficult. And I know a lot of pastors who thought, man, my church is going to bounce right back after COVID. They haven't seen that happen. I think Tom Rainer says something around, a third of the people just aren't coming back. When you take that, so the 18 months or so that we walked through of that, and now we're looking at inflation and the fact that that's probably going to hit budgets. I've seen churches come back with just astronomical insurance premium increases for next year. So there's a lot kind of out there that can seem daunting and can seem overwhelming, especially to a church that's already struggling to kind of get its feet back underneath it after COVID. So for pastors and church leaders who are just, in the middle of the trenches and wondering, how can I keep going another month, 6 months, year? How do you hope that this book will encourage and equip them?
I think that's a very good question. Let me say a few words to pastors listening, especially, and those not just pastors, but ministering within a local church context. First of all, the pastoral years have been complicated. They have been challenging, and with COVID, it wasn't just like I refer to it as solution fatigue. It's like you find yourself, especially in those early months, of having to work through like solutions by the day. and not just solutions that you wound up having to employ, but solutions to hypothetical but potential problems as well. Okay. And so for us here for months, we lived in kind of a little bit of solution fatigue, and God was kind, and enrollment stayed strong. We grew through COVID, and financial support stayed strong. But there was a lot of that overhanging. And then so you had that going on. And then you also have, oh, by the way, we can't come together as we like. So kind of this distancing was taking place while a certain weariness was setting in. And I think that's true for many pastors as well. Throughout the past couple of years, it has been hard. And giving for many has not been what one thought. And people haven't come back as we had hoped. And so there's been a challenge there. I would say on the flip side of that, Kyle, is I do think we need to be careful that we don't just all the time talk about how difficult ministry is, and then we're surprised one day when we find out we don't want to be in ministry anymore. And I do worry at times. There's a little bit of a never-ending conversation about how hard ministry is. And look, ministry can be challenging. I'm now in my mid-40s, and I've been serving in ministry-type roles, beginning as a college student for about 25 years. And I've seen the ups and downs, the sweeter seasons, the more challenging seasons. So I don't want to be superficial and say just suck it up. Ministry's great, and it may not feel great to you right now, but it actually is. I don't want to say that, but I do want to intentionally hold up the glory of local church ministry, the glory of a call to preach and teach the Word of God, the glory of pastoral ministry, and say, I do believe that when we're thinking clearly, the glory of that, the joys of that, the eternal rewards of that offsets the momentary challenges. The last thing I would say, and I think this is a thing as well, okay? I do think it has been a full couple of years. Again, I just said ministry is still sweet and good, but it has been a difficult couple of years now, 2.5 years. And I have found myself even last month, I was in a conversation with a couple of colleagues, men who I love dearly, not staff members here, but people I love dearly. And I found myself more irritable in that conversation than like I normally would be. I'm not a person like prone to like a lot of irritation. I'm a happy person by nature. I kind of wake up sunny, not cloudy. And I found more irritation in myself in that meeting. And I began to kind of unpack that. Okay, like why is this the case? And I felt a little bit because just an emotional season, as I just mentioned, with our, kind of run my 10th, and you're seeing all this picture of your kids having grown up. Like, whoa, where's life went the past 10 years? But also, I think in our Southern Baptist moment, there's just an added degree of tension. I think folks are just kind of on edge, and it seems like whether it's the DOJ investigation on New York that was announced earlier a couple months back, late summer, to just other stuff of bad news we seem to get, and you kind of find yourself wincing when your phone rings, wondering, what am I about to be told here? And I think that can wear on people. I mean, I was in another ministry setting here in recent weeks and saw a couple other godly guys who love one another, and I know them well; they're good friends, and watching them kind of spar a little bit. I thought, well, that's not how you guys are. And I was thinking, I think perhaps, we are wearing thinner in some ways than we've realized. And perhaps a protracted Thanksgiving and Christmas break will be good for a lot of ministers out there.
Yeah, I think Christmas and Thanksgiving break is going to be wonderful for a bunch of people just to step away for a little bit. Well, as we begin to wrap up here, what is one hope or one thing that you hope readers take away from the book?
I hope readers take away a sense of encouragement. I'm going to give you kind of a part A and part B to the answer. Sense of encouragement by the basic narrative that God has done special work here. I mean, over the past 10 years, Kyle, we went from about 1,100 students to about 5,000. In a context when institutions and seminaries and divinity schools in North America largely are declining. I went from a financial situation where we were dead broke, couldn't meet payroll, to in a situation now where we have a sustainable business model and are able to care for our people well here. So I hope they're encouraged by a story of God working in a special place at this institution. I hope they also are emboldened, okay? I hope every mom walks away from this book thinking, okay, I'm better equipped to serve my family. I hope every pastor reading this book walks away and says, okay, I'm emboldened to lead with more intentionality than I was when I picked the book up. So I hope there's an encouragement, and I hope there's an emboldening that takes place in the lives of the reader. And I would say as well, the book is not that long to read. It's a couple hundred pages, I think, something like that. And so, I mean, you can read it, it's actually a little less than that. It's about 180 pages. You can read it, in just a few hours. And so I think you can work through it quickly. You can ascertain what's most germane, what's most relevant to you in your place of service, your context of leadership. And I think you'll be better served for it.
Fantastic. Well, then last question, and this is going to be a two-parter. What's the most exciting thing happening at Midwestern right now? And then, of course, how can our listeners be praying for you and Midwestern in the days moving forward?
It's a great question. So I will tell you what's the most exciting thing happening this very moment. I will give you a couple things. First of all, delighted to see what's taking place on this campus. There's a cheerfulness, a conviction, students coming in record numbers. And that shows up next month. We'll be graduating our largest December commencement group ever, 275 students graduating in December. That's amazing. I mean, that's an amazing number of students graduating. So we rejoice in the students we get to invest in, and we rejoice as they go. We're sad when they go, but we're encouraged because we know what God will be using them. We now have students, Kyle, from all 50 states and 63 countries.
Wow.
We're a global institution, and we rejoice in that. How can you pray for us? I think the word that I always go back to is the word faithfulness. Help us to be faithful theologically, doctrinally. Help us be faithful to our mission. Help us to be spiritually faithful to honor Christ in all things great and small. Help us to be faithful so we look back, hopefully, if God extends our years at the ripe old age, 30 years from now, and we see that God did a special work here, and His church is, we're the real beneficiaries of it.
That's fantastic. Well, the book is Turnaround, the remarkable story of an institutional transformation and the 10 essential principles and practices that made it happen, by Dr. Jason Allen, available from B&H Books, which means it's available everywhere. Barnes & Noble, Mardel, Lifeway, your local bookstore, it's available. And so you want to check that out. Dr. Allen, thank you so much for being with us today. Well, with me. Matt's off doing something else, but I know he's sorry that he missed it, but it was a joy to have you on. Thank you for listening, and until next time, may your coffee be as black as night and as bold as the gospel you declare.
What's wrong with you people?